There's a reminder of several stories relative to our question, what is our relationship with life now? And the first is that story of the old woman who was wandering in the forest gathering herbs when she came across a lone monk sitting in meditation. He was young and not yet in samadhi. He was feeling the effects of the cold wind that blew through the trees. So the old woman felt great compassion for him. So she went about building a little shelter to shelter him from the wind. And from that time on, she attached herself to him. Everywhere he went, she followed, and she would catch fish for him to eat, cooking it over a little brazier. She would gather herbs and prepare them to keep his body strong. But after some years, she decided it was time to test him. So the next time they came to a small town, the old woman went out to seek out a woman of the night, and she found a young and beautiful being, and she asked her to go to the monk and seek his companionship, so to speak. So the young woman followed the old's directions, and afterwards the old woman asked her, "Well, what happened?" And the young woman related that she had come to the monk, and she had sat beside him, and she had caressed him, and that all he said was, "An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter. Nowhere is there any warmth." And the old woman said, "Do you mean to say that he did not show you any compassion? He did not give you words of comfort? He did not even give you some words from the Dharma?" "No," said the young woman. The old woman said, "Why, that ungrateful wretch." And she immediately went and burned down his hut that she had built, and she left him. And the second story is that story about that Abdal, as called, they're called the changed ones. And he was a monk of sorts, and he lived alone in the mountains, spending all his time in deep meditation, oftentimes in a state of samadhi, so called. He never foraged for food. He sat, and he sat. And it so happened that hunters who would come by would leave him something to eat, and the villagers, thinking that he was someone special, they would bring some curd or some yogurt for him to eat. But he never acknowledged. It seems that he was impervious to their visitations. But it so happened that several days passed, and nobody had left any food for him. And suddenly his stomach began to grumble. And the days passed, and he tried to put at bay these feelings of the human flesh, but the hunger grew greater. His stomach growled, and his tongue grew dry from not drinking of that which was usually bought for him. So after some time he could not bear it any longer. He had to rise up and go and seek water and something to eat. Well, as he descended from the mountains, there was a stream, so he was able to slake his thirst. But his stomach still grumbled with hunger, unbearable hunger. But in the distance he saw a field where there was corn growing. And when he crossed the stream, there was waving in the breeze the wonderful ripe heads of corn. So he went and picked 2 of them and ravenously cleared the cobs of their succulent globules. But after he'd been satisfied, he looked around, and of course this field had been cultivated, and he suddenly had a thought. What if this field belongs to some poor farmer, and I have stolen from his mouth that which he has worked hard to grow? So a great feeling of remorse filled him, and being of that bent and that belief, he importuned the gods. Please, since I have committed a wrong, punish me, but let it be now. Let it be now. Well, because of his good works and his time of renunciation in the mountains, his prayer was answered, and as though time had sped up incredibly, he died and was reborn again as a young beast, a bullock. And there he was, standing beside the stream. Well, before this, he had gone off into the village, and he had asked around who belonged to that field of corn. And indeed he was told that it belonged to a widow who had 4 children, and she grew the corn to provide food for her children. But back to the story line, here was he as a young bullock standing by the stream when a farmer came along, a farmer who had only recently lost his bullock. And seeing this young fine beast, he wondered who it belonged to, and so he went to ask around, did anyone belong? No one. So he harnessed our monk, now a bullock, and took him back to his fields. For long years the bullock served the farmer. He was kind to him. He was well fed. But time passes, and finally the bullock, now old, died. The farmer cut the flesh from its bones and dried out the skull, and placing the skull on a stake, he put it out in the middle of his field of wheat to keep away the crows. One night, after the farmer had reaped his field and gathered the wheat into bags ready to take to the market the next day, 3 thieves came into his field and, approaching his barn, saw the beautifully bagged wheat, and each putting a bag on his shoulders, crept out into the fields to make their escape. But as they were creeping through the field with the bags of wheat on their shoulders, they heard a great cackling, raucous laughter. They were all afraid, and they turned around to look where the laughter was coming from. And as they followed its sound, they saw the skull of the bullock on the stake, its jaw rattling with the sound of the laughter. Very fearful, they said, "Why are you laughing at us?" And the old skull spoke and said, "Look at me. I was an Abdal, a changed one, and I stole 2 cobs of corn. For this I paid the price of living a life of service as a bullock. I am laughing because you, who have stolen the whole field of wheat that has been a farmer's work, and wonder what kind of punishment will be dealt to you." The thieves, with great fear, dropped the bags of wheat and ran off, forever changed. Never again did they steal. Our relationship with life now. What is life for us? Do we, when all those 3 levels of existence, the nitty-gritty, cause and effect, the realm of the occult and spirit, infinite, and that sense of oneness and interrelatedness come together for us, and we move inexorably, inevitably, into a space which seems to be beyond existence, sometimes called no mind. Are we then impervious to life? Are we then witnesses to existence? Are we separate from those 3 levels? What's your relationship with life now? What is this place where those three levels of existence come together in a moment of life, where there is no longer any division between them, and yet we cannot make them real in the sense of taking personally whatever experience occurs for us. Where are we? What is it? What is this place? What arises for you out of these two stories?